Hello everyone, my name is Georgina Duran and I will be giving you a perspective and insight into systematic racism in America, a situation that is still ongoing in our current times in which it has grown from deep racism and hidden culture laid beneath our feet, concealing its rich and tarnished history. Opinion versus fact. Before we delve into the presentation, I would like to explain the opinion versus fact conversation which is brought up when it comes to systematic racism. In our Constitution, under the First Amendment, states that we have the freedom of speech and the press. We as American citizens are allowed to speak our minds when it comes to our personal opinion. There is no harassing or ridicule of an opinion, as it would go against the Constitution and what it states in its First Amendment. But people can choose to ignore an opinion and simply go along with their day. This applies to people who choose to ignore systematic racism and choose to believe it simply doesn't happen anymore, when that isn't the case here. People who lay ignorant to the fact that systematic racism doesn't exist in our society can choose to ignore the opinions of others, but they cannot ignore the facts. Facts that relay and ring facts with facts of truth, which affect many citizens and minorities. Facts are what lay the foundation for the importance of truth. Without a fact backing up the truth can't be verified, and it will likely be only viewed as an opinion. In today's current society, we are now exposing truths that have been hidden by our brainwashed history, and it's simply common sense now to back up the truth with fact. But I'm currently arguing that people tend to throw around accusations of truth, claiming something isn't what it is, but without giving a concrete fact to aid in the evidence of this claimed truth. Take this opinion essay written by Mr. Arendt called The Myth of Systematic Racism. It's on the right. His opinion presented in the essay is that systematic racism is a type of racism that is more modern and is even used to eliminate the aspect of individual race prejudice, and that uses collective guilt or innocence to support terms that all whites are racist or blacks can be racist. He explains traditional racism in definition. He makes claims that there are a few white supremacists in our country, and if there is a rare instance a police officer is found to be racist, they are disciplined and removed from the force. Take the case of Breonna Taylor or George Floyd. It took a massive amount of public outcry to demand change and justice and change we are still seeking. The contradiction which I present here is that Mr. Arendt doesn't present one concrete fact of true evidence, whether it is a piece of statistic or specific situation. This article is simply an opinion and cannot honestly be applied to ring true. On the other hand, on the left, an article written by Mrs. Marcus of the Washington Post states her opinion, but at the same time defends her opinion with statistics. They bring up current themes and topics of the matter, such as the BML movement. She mentions and shows statistics on specific topics such as incarceration rates over a specific amount of crimes or police brutality. When you provide a personal opinion with evidence, that is true. You can believe that the opinion is true. If you leave a personal opinion without facts, you can automatically assume speculation and suspicion. History. Subjects that are to be brought up: Native American genocide, Japanese American internment camps, African American urban exodus, Latino struggles in California's government. Throughout California's history, the leaders of the state have created systems where people and minorities are inferior to Caucasian Americans. Whether we talk about Native Indigenous peoples genocide, Japanese American harassment and abuse, African American urban exodus, or the mistreatment of Hispanics in California. A lot of these facts and tattered history are chosen to be hidden away and hardly taught in our students' education. We are now exposing the bias in which California has a hidden history that contains a lot of racism, which isn't acknowledged in our current books. California leaders have set intentionally hard-to-pass goals for minorities who find it hard to strive and thrive in California. We as California are currently representing nearly a quarter of the U.S. homeless population. California is a striving state, and yet at the same time, we are slowly adding kindle to our downfire. Native American genocide. In 1848, on the cusp of the gold rush, a bounty was placed on California's indigenous population. In less than 20 years more, up to a half and close to 80% of California's Native American population was wiped out. For a given context, some of these deaths were taken by disease and lack of land due to new settlers, but the rest of those lives were taken in cold blood. Keep in mind this was completely illegal. It was even supported and sponsored by the state of California. This is a small fragment of what happened in Native American genocide, but this is a brief example of showing you how a system was put in place against groups as minorities. Right here we have a photo of an ad that was placed for bounties on Native Americans, and we have a photo sketch of what Native American genocide looked like. They did kill women and children. Moving on, Japanese American internment camps. The harassment of Japanese Americans had begun long before the crossfires of World War II. Californians were suspicious of anybody of Asian American descent. Laws were even made, such as the Naturalization Act of 1870, which only allowed white immigrants to become citizens. As soon as the bombing of Pearl Harbor had happened, many non-governmental hunting licenses of Japanese people had been circulated all over America. Even Life magazine presented an article on telling the difference between a Japanese person and a Chinese one. Executive Order 9066 gave way to halt anyone who was deemed dangerous. It didn't specifically target any group, but it was largely implied for any minority, particularly Japanese Americans. Approximately 110,000 Japanese nationals and Japanese Americans were interned in housing facilities called war relocation camps. These camps were terrible, lacking in basic human necessities at times. Even some camps, you could compare them to concentration camps. These two camps here are the Santa Anita camps, located in California. Moving on, African American urban exodus. In California, in recent years, black renters have been forced out of their homes whether it wasn't affordable for them. In newer, less black-populated neighborhoods, it faced subtle hints of segregation. Things like job discriminations have been appearing. In 2018, nearly 75,000 black residents had left California. In the past years, living in California was quite simple. Everything wasn't expensive. But now in the upcoming years, everything has grown quite harder. The racial wealth gap even grows higher in Los Angeles. White households have a median net worth of $355,000 compared to $4,000 for black households. Black people make up around 6% of California's total population, but they also make up 40% of the state's homeless population. With the rent rate growing up higher in California and the wealth gap growing even larger, it shows how unintentionally the system is making it harder for African Americans. Right here we have the Urban Exodus Bay Area and the Urban Exodus Los Angeles, and it tells basic charts on how the moving patterns or and where they would move. And the green for the Bay Area is where it was gaining black residents like Elk Grove, Stockton, Brentwood, and Antioch, and areas losing black residents such as Berkeley, Oakland, East Palo Alto, and San Francisco. In Los Angeles here you have gaining black residents Lancaster, Palmdale, Victorville, Moreno Valley, while areas losing black residents are Los Angeles, Westmont, Linwood, and Compton. Over here we have the graph of San Francisco's population, of how African American is rising. Population is rising, and it's growing more downfall as the years move on forward. Moving on, Latino struggles with California's government. California's 1994 187 proposition has shown how we set up laws and systems to create a harder lifestyle for a group of people. Prop 187 prohibits undocumented immigrants from using non-emergency health care, public education, or any types of other services in the state of California. The 2020 California Census has displayed a hidden message to our communities. Latino opinions are not wanted. With Trump's threats on immigrants, it sends signals to Hispanics who are fearful of their current status and simply don't want to participate in the census. The Census Bureau has stated they want to get more involved in the community, but is highly unlikely that it will happen. The lack of outreach in our communities is struggling, as a lot of Hispanics are fearing for their legal status due to the intimidation of the public. Moving on. Systematic racism with COVID-19. Throughout the pandemic, oppressing matter has arisen, the COVID-19 crisis, and how it correlates with systematic racism. Out of the estimated 240,000 COVID-related deaths in America, more than half of those deaths were people who were minorities. COVID-19 simply isn't a pandemic now. It is a reminder that constantly shows that our American culture is so easily able to be toppled over with a small push. By early April and June, many COVID cases had increased for neighborhoods of color, which were higher in Latinx and Black neighborhoods. This is happening because white and wealthy communities can afford to stay home and follow quarantine orders, while a majority of low-income neighborhoods of Black and Latinx occupied have to work to afford basic needs and necessities, which are putting them at risk while they go to work. California is impacted by all the decisions of the wealth gap here between ethnicities and pay rates. Over here we have a graph consisting of Los Angeles, San Francisco, and California on the deaths. And the legend is there is a dark purple is black, the lavenderish color is white, Hispanic is pink, Asian is orange, and unknown is the pale yellow. In California, there was 172 deaths as of April 8, which consisted of 37% of white, but 30% of deaths were Hispanic, and 6% were Black, and 14% were Asian. And the charts have risen much more higher as the COVID-19 pandemic progresses. As we continue in these difficult times, California will only have to learn to improve and change these ways, whether it is by acknowledging the past or changing current laws to apply equality for every single California resident, no matter their race or the amount they get paid or where they live. Thank you for listening to my presentation.